He's got less personality than a dead mackerel.
Hello. So, I've got a bunch of books with me, but no notes. But I want to talk about something that I think is really, really important. And this might be one that I put up on the main video for new visitors for ages, I'm not sure. This is about what I think is the most important part of storytelling. The most important part. So, there are loads of elements to storytelling, and clearly, because I'm going to focus mostly on science fiction, a big part of science fiction is the concept and the kind of scientific thing you're exploring. You know, even if it's just visiting alien worlds, then it's still got to build that world, and you've got to define it, and that is still going to be a part of your story and still part of your storytelling. But for it to be good storytelling, it has to have really good characterization, because without characters that we can identify with and we can empathize with and we're invested in, then it could work, but it's going to be massively lacking. I think the most important thing to make it a good book, make it a good story, is characters. There are some stories that have worked without that, but I do think to be a good writer, so it's kind of worked despite the lack of characters. So to be a good writer, I think you've got to be good at characters. I think it's really, really important. So there are some authors that get kind of named some of the greatest authors ever, and they're not great at characters. I just can't relate to that. I just think characters are so important. If you're not great at characters, you know, if you're one of those authors that gets praised a lot for the concepts, but actually not great at characters, I just don't think they're a good author. I think they're good at ideas, but such an important part of being an author is the way you tell the story through the characters' eyes, and the way that we relate to the story through the characters. I think that's how good storytelling happens. So I guess it's that thing where I put on Ollie's comment on Ollie's channel once. Was one of the recent things he did, where I talked about how good prose or good descriptions don't make you a good storyteller. So to tell a good story, you tell the story through the characters. You always tell the story through the characters. If it was just a blank sort of, you know, pages and pages and pages of prose, no characters in it, or the characters were just archetypes, then I think, you know, it would be severely lacking as a story. It might have some great concepts, but characters make it come alive. So this whole thought for this video, it does bounce off the video that Ollie did when he said he'd binned off War and Peace. So this, obviously, War and Peace isn't science fiction. I'm covering mostly science fiction here because it's mostly what I read, or mostly what I want to read. I've tried to sort of deviate more and more from that for the channel, but it is my favourite area of literature by a mile. So I'm going to cover that mostly, but I'm going to talk about a few authors that go outside that as well. But I wanted to talk about some authors that are just really good at telling a story, good storytellers. And again, because they do it through such great characters, and characters that you believe in, characters that you care about, characters that are saying something really important in the story, either to themselves, because that happens, or to other characters, or you're just noticing it as a reader. So the author is managing to get that through the characters without the character even realizing sometimes. So good characterization breeds good storytelling. That's the point of this video. And if anyone says, "Oh yeah, but this book's really good, isn't it?" Yeah, I agree that there would be some books that are good books, but I do think that a good storyteller is different from someone who can write nice prose. You can tell a good story. So anyway, I'm going to start with an author that has been criticised a lot for being too centred on characters, and has been criticised for not having enough tension or action in their books, because it's all about relationships and the way that they attach some really interesting ways that characters have to learn about other cultures and all that sort of stuff through alien definitions in science fiction settings. So this is Becky Chambers. So I'm holding this second book up. I think this is the best book of the Wayfarers series, and it's really centered on two characters. So the other books have got much bigger cast, but this is pretty much two characters, an AI character and a child, or at least, well, a child that's a little bit older but has been through, there's a lot of the backstory with the character in the story goes through when they were a child and had some very traumatic childhood. And the way that both of those characters learn about how to adapt to a new life and how to adapt to each other and how to let go of the past is fantastic. It's so brilliantly done. It's absolutely brilliant. But through that, you're also going through a science fiction story about AI and about what happened to this child and the don't want to spoil it, but the things that she has to cope with as she gets older because of what happened to her in the past. And it's just so brilliant. But it's just about characters. She is very, very good at drawing characters, and that's why she's a good storyteller. So even though it's a fair criticism to say that sometimes not a lot happens, enough happens for it to be worthwhile reading, and what the things that happen to the characters, and you believe and invest in the characters so much that it really does impact you. So yeah, I wanted to start with her because she's clearly very character driven in what she writes. So I think she's a really good example of what I'm talking about, being a good storyteller. And then I thought it'd be fun to talk about someone who does get praised a lot for the big concepts and the hard science and the huge landscape that he writes on. So he'll have this huge canvas of many worlds across many millennia, and he's got this huge kind of space opera kind of setting, and that's usually what gets praised. And I'm talking about Alistair Reynolds. And Alistair Reynolds is obviously very famous for the Revelation Space series, and he's very famous for being a hard science fiction writer. But he wrote this trilogy, the Revenger trilogy, and I've got the other two books. But I read the other two books. I've read all three of them, and I really enjoyed them. I thought they were really good. Some people have called them YA, and I don't think they are at all. They're just a different tone to his other stuff. So his other stuff is more serious and more, well, this is serious, but more drier, I suppose. I don't like that word, but ultimately this has still got many serious bits in it, but it has got an adventure element to it. The main characters are relatively young, which is why I think it gets labelled YA, but it's not, because there's so much. It goes so much deeper than that, and it's just for any audience really. It's definitely, I think it's an adult book, trilogy. It's really good, and the thing is, the reason why it's so good, the reason why you want to keep reading it, the reason why it's such a good example of storytelling is the two main characters, the two sisters that are running through this story. I won't give you any spoilers, but they start off with this sort of hectic situation at home in the first sort of chapter, and then they get kind of catapulted into space, and it's like they're in this situation that they have to grow up quickly. They have to make a decision about who they're going to be, and both of them make different decisions, and it spins off into a very complicated plot that basically involves space pirates, and the pirate element of it is really cool, but it's just a really good story. All three stories, all three books, you can see why he wanted to write a trilogy. They're really good. So essential to this is the two central characters and the relationship between them, that changes a lot through the story, and they change a lot, and their relationship changes a lot, and their whole motivations and their whole morality changes a lot through the whole thing. So I do think it's worth taking this one seriously, and I don't think a lot of Alistair Reynolds fans do, because they think it's just a load of nonsense, but it's really good, I thought. So a good example of storytelling. Another one, the Martha Wells Murderbot series. Quite short. I've only read the first one. Not a lot happens, but it's really good. And I think it's really good because of how much you're invested in the character of the Murderbot. who's a robot who loves soap operas, but they're questioning their orders, and they are always trying to get this sort of moral decision making happening through the story, and it's really interesting, and it's really it's just well written. You do. I was going to say you believe in it. I mean, obviously it's science fiction, but you do. It does have that. The way that the character is moralizing is realistic, and I do think that's what gives it its charm. So yeah, charm is something I haven't mentioned yet, and that's part of investing in a character, isn't it? If they can charm you, and if you can see them as quite likable, and that's definitely true for the Murderbot series, because not actually that much happens in this story, but it's still gripping, and it's because of how much you're invested in the central robot. This is a big one for me because it's literally what I've been calling my favourite book for ages now. And it wasn't always, but it is at the moment. Flowers for Algernon. I love this so much. So I read this probably about, I don't know, 5 years ago now. But I still think about it a lot. I love it so much. And again, this is literally defined by the character that is going through this procedure to try and change their intelligence. So Charlie is someone who has lower intelligence. There's sort of hints of special needs, and he gets he gets mocked at work, and he's going through this process, and you really do care about him, and what happens through the story is really, really amazing, and it's really powerful, and it's really emotional. It's a fantastic book, but it absolutely hinges on whether or not you care about Charlie. Characters. Even a high concept thriller like Dark Matter would not work unless you cared about what happens to the main character. Yeah, so Jason Dessen is the main character who gets spun off into this bizarre situation, which is a great science fiction trope to play with. And again, I don't want to spoil it because it happens about 3 chapters in, and when it happens, you're like, oh, okay, that's what this book's going to be about. And he's trying to get to his wife. He loves his wife. You get that all the way through it. It's a love story. You do care about him, and you like him, and it's just amazing. I love this book, but it only works if you care about Jason, and it only works if you want him to get to his wife. Yeah, amazing. So he's really good at writing characters. He's really good at writing, putting an unbelievable situation into a realistic situation that you can relate to and empathise with. So again, characters, Blake Crouch. I've just mentioned that you liked Jason. So I wanted to mention a book that I didn't like the main character, but it absolutely worked because you invested in what the character was doing and how you did care about the situation, even though you didn't like the main character. So The Demolished Man by Alfred Bester, one of the books of the classic era, if you like. This was the first book to get a Hugo Award. So one of the books out of the classic era that I think is just incredible. Absolutely love this book. But I didn't like the main character. I think the main character is very unlikable. So it's not I didn't like him in an intellectual sense, because I do like the character as in it's a great character for the story, but I didn't like him personally as in he's a nasty piece of work. So I think that's really good because it's told in a way that it doesn't matter, because you're intrigued to know what the character is going to do and how he's going to get over this issue about it's like trying to deal with murder through a world that has telepathy as an ongoing thing, and it's just really cool the way it's explored. So I would definitely recommend this anyway, but it is nice that it's an example where you don't have to like the character to still think it's really good storytelling, and it is really good storytelling. So The Stars of My Destination is also really good, and actually not a particularly nice character either, but this is my preferred one out of the 2, but I love both books. So a couple more stories, and like Storyteller examples, then I'll delve into areas that are not science fiction. So again, Adrian Tchaikovsky is very good conceptually. He has great ideas, but also he is good at writing characters, and those ideas would not work without good characters. Dogs of War is a great exploration of AI dogs that have to obey orders, and they're like dog soldiers, but Rex, the main character, is questioning his orders, same way that Murderbot does, and you really want Rex to be able to work it out, and you care about Rex, and it's really cool the way that the story unfolds, and you want to know what happens to Rex. It's not about you just finishing the book or getting through to the end of the story or knowing what's happening in general. You want to know what's happening to Rex. Yeah. So, yeah, again, characters are really important. And even in Children of Time, I think it's Pandora, the main spider, I think. And I really like that character. And I think, again, if I didn't like that character, it would be harder work. So he can tell a good story as well. And then one last one, who I don't think is always about characters. He doesn't always flesh out his characters that well. But John Scalzi, it's Old Man's War, where I think John Perry is the main character who is thrust into a situation where he's got to get used to loads of things at once. He's decided to join the army at 77 or something. And the way that it works, you get a new body and he's got to get used to a new way of living. It's a great concept, but again, it's through the eyes of the main character, John, who you do care about. And if you didn't care about him, the book would fail. So, again, you know, same with The Martian. To be fair, I haven't got The Martian out, but you know, I mentioned that in another video recently. But you know, The Martian, unless you cared about Mark Watney, it wouldn't work. It just wouldn't work. Good storytelling. So, 4 more examples, then I'll finish it off. So, one of the great storytellers, but actually not very often does he delve into characters that much because he's more of a short story writer than a novelist. But he has written some novels, and that's Ray Bradbury. So, Ray Bradbury is one of my, easily one of my all-time authors. Possibly my favourite author, but he's definitely one of my all-time favourite authors, in my top 3, whatever. But he is mostly short stories. But when he does write a novel, and this is my favourite novel of his, you get that really good sense of characterization. And with this one, in particular, the father in the story, so it's actually mostly about 2 boys, but one of them, the father reflects a lot about him getting older, and the book is about aging. That's what the whole book's about. It's about getting old. It's about making the most of your young years and kind of making the most of your old years and not being too resentful and regretful about being old. It's such a beautiful book. It's also an ugly book because it's a horror book, but it is a beautiful book. The way he writes is beautiful, and the way he's painted the characters in this is just fantastic. But I think it's the father of one of the sons that is one of the boys is the really strong character in it, that kind of tells us the message of the book really well. So I do think it's not always the main character, but obviously it can be. So Something Wicked This Way Comes. Right, okay, so 3 examples now of not science fiction. So I recently raved about this. I won't go on about it again because there's a whole massive video about it. But this is extremely successful. It's a crime thriller that is about characters. It does have very deep messages about race, about the gay community, and about poverty. Those 3 areas are massively explored, but they're explored through 2 fantastic characters that are really, really real. So, S.A. Cosby, Razorblade Tears. Watch my video on it if you want me to talk about it for longer, but the characterization in this is ridiculous. And I've only got one of the Belgard books here, but it's 5-book series. It's really, really derivative, but it doesn't matter because you love the characters. You know, David Eddings tells a great story with the Belgariad because of the characters. This is book 3. It's a 5-book series. It was one of the big moments of my childhood reading. I'm going to read them again soon, this year. But when I do, I can't wait to discover the characters again properly, because it's the characters that made this great. It doesn't matter that it's derivative; it's the characters. And then a man that gets discussed a lot on here because, quite rightly, he's very, very successful. So clearly, he's going to get discussed a lot. But his secret weapon is characters. So Stephen King, Cujo, I've decided to hold up because Cujo hasn't got a particularly complicated plot, but it's really effective. And it's really effective because you care about the main kind of 4 characters, but especially the boy. And in general, you just care about the people that Stephen King portrays in the story. He has got a reputation that's been earned of him characterizing like crazy, and like literally, every man and his dog in the village, in the town, backwards. And he can over characterize, but he's really good at it. So you do know them. You literally know them backwards. You know everything about them. Now, there's another book of his called Needful Things, which a lot of people don't rate very highly. But I personally do. It's one of my favourite Stephen King books, and it is definitely an example where you know everybody in the town. But it all works because so many people in the town have been manipulated by the villain in the story. So I think that's why he went so far into it. But I've heard that sometimes in some of the other books he's done that I haven't read, he goes into a lot of detail about characters that don't actually feature much in the story. So he can over-characterize, but he's very good at characterizing. So if he has done it with too many characters, but he is good at doing it when he is doing it, even if he's doing it too much, doing it to too many characters. And sometimes he just gets it absolutely right, or often he gets it right, to be honest. And this is one of those books that really, really works. And it's got a real emotional punch at the end. And again, it wouldn't have it if it didn't have that great characterization. So just to sum up, a great storyteller is telling his story through its characters. So if you ever find yourself saying about an author, it's a great concept, really good story, but the characters were a bit bland or cliche or not particularly fleshed out very well, you are saying something quite damning about the author's skills, I think, as a storyteller. So they might be great with their use of language and the way how poetic they might be in their prose, but it's such an important element to telling a story because you're telling the story through the characters. So that's what I think. Let me know what you think about some of the authors. Tell me some of the authors that you think are really good at creating characters. Thanks a lot. Thanks for watching. Bye.